A question that comes up a lot on this journey is it normal to start feeling depressed when you're on this healing journey? Let's dive in. Hi, I'm Peggy Oliveira. Thank you so much for joining me. If you're new, make sure to subscribe and click the bell for notifications. So, this is something that comes up for a lot of people. For people that haven't yet started, there's this fear of just things getting worse, of feeling a lot of things that you don't want to feel. And that can keep people from beginning this journey. And it often tends to happen that people will start healing, and typically not in the very beginning, although it certainly does happen. But when they start allowing themselves to feel things or address things, basically no longer coping by being in denial or avoiding or minimizing, they can start to feel things that maybe they haven't really allowed themselves to feel. And unfortunately, that's when a lot of people stop going to therapy. And so then it's reinforced that they can't heal, that therapy makes things worse, that they were better off before. And that always is a little heartbreaking to me, because fortunately I've had enough experience to know that it doesn't at all have to be where the story ends. And depending on who you're working with, depending on your other life circumstances, how long it takes you to get there, I can't say, because it's going to vary for everybody. There are a lot of factors that play into it, and not even related to your actual experience that you're trying to heal from. A lot of it has to do with other life events, things that are happening in your life currently, the level of support. So there's a lot of things that go into it. But when people get to that place and things start coming up for them, they get scared, which is completely natural. And unfortunately, I think a lot of times it's not discussed with their therapist. Their therapist isn't discussing with them the reality of that, and how that happens, and why it happens, and what it takes to be able to continue to push forward to move through that. So people tend to give up, and then they don't continue. And again, that's heartbreaking. One of the things that I think is important for people to understand is that, like, people will often say, I was doing so much better before. And sometimes that can absolutely be true. And depending on how you're looking at it, that could be true. That could be said really for probably most people, especially if they're kind of new to the healing journey. But one of the things that I think is important to look at is that how things were before you started the journey probably were not ideal. Otherwise, you likely wouldn't have decided to take the journey. And I think that this is important because because it's different, because we're feeling different, we're doing things differently, we can equate that to being bad. And certainly if we're feeling things that we've not allowed ourselves to feel before, it's going to seem like a bad thing. But I think it's important to be able to recognize that while it's different, and while it may be harder in some ways, how is it hard in other ways before you started the journey? So while people can say, I wasn't anxious before I started doing this, or I wasn't depressed before I was doing this, I wasn't having this problem or that problem before I started doing this. And those things can have some truth to them, absolutely. But what was present before? Because again, if there's a reason that you started this journey, it's probably because something wasn't working for you. And oftentimes, what I see happen is that people can, from the outside, it looks like everything is really great. People would not necessarily know that you were struggling or that you had a history or anything like that. And we, as a society, tend to think that that means that things are good and that you're good, and then you must be happy. There must not be anything bad going on. You must not struggle, which is completely inaccurate. I have worked with so many women over the years because I tend to work, especially in the last half of my career. I tend to work with women who are successful, who are professionals. And when I say success, I'm talking about like professionally successful, who by appearance sake, what we view as success, that's where they're at. And yet, so often it's those women who have the hardest time in being able to kind of reconcile that what they're experiencing now, while it may look different in terms of healthiness, emotional well-being, it's actually not worse, and often it's actually better, even if it doesn't feel better necessarily. Because they've been masking, they've been denying, avoiding, minimizing as a way of coping. And when you are able to compartmentalize, when you are able to be in denial, then you can go through your life as if everything is okay. But what I see happen over and over again is that for these people, and other people too, so it's not just those people, what I see happen is that actually sometimes what they end up seeing happening is that while it may look different, there were quite a few struggles. Maybe they were a workaholic and they didn't know how to take a break. They didn't know how to take a day off when they're sick. They didn't know how to say no to people. They didn't know how to say yes to themselves. They appeared successful, but they had no meaningful relationships in their lives. Or they would get out of that social situation or out of the work environment, go home and drink a bottle of wine because they were stressed, because they were feeling lonely, because they were overwhelmed, exhausted in trying to keep Jack in that box. That's a reference to how I tend to talk about this. But that is exhausting. It's exhausting wearing that mask and having to hold that mask up and make sure it doesn't slip. So when you are in this process, when you start to feel things that you're not used to feeling, when you start putting yourself in a position to feel vulnerable, when you have at all costs avoided vulnerability, because it feels scary and uncertain and new, it's going to feel like it is worse. And again, I don't want to minimize the reality that some of those feelings are going to feel worse. Coping mechanisms are powerful and they provide a really important purpose. But not feeling, not addressing things that have greatly impacted you, it's not healthy. It doesn't allow you to live your life in the way that you deserve to live it. It doesn't allow you to feel the things that you deserve to be able to feel. Because right when we shut down, we can't just shut down the so-called bad feelings. We have to kind of numb to good feelings too. So if we use avoidance of feelings, we're avoiding most feelings. Or if we get a glimpse of something that feels good, it shuts down very quickly. And sometimes our cognitive process is a part of that, right? We're afraid of feeling good. We're afraid of sabotaging it. We're waiting for that shoe to drop. And sometimes it's just very short-lived because it's not big enough to take up enough space to make that much of a difference. So, and I've done another video probably more than one, on how sometimes things can feel worse when you're on this process before they start to feel better. And unfortunately, that is a natural part of this process. So it's really important, I'm going to say this again, to really think about, is it factually true that everything is so much worse now than it was? And I will fully accept that in a lot of ways, factually, it may be worse than it was. But there are things that can happen, that you can do, things that you can put into place to help kind of mitigate some of that, so that it doesn't have to be a whole lot worse. And really recognizing that, yeah, you might have had all these people around you a lot, but how often did you feel truly connected? How often did you truly feel safe in another person's presence to be completely yourself? And I think so often, because we are in that just forge forward and put the blinders on and don't feel anything, we can fool ourselves into believing that everything is really great, and you don't want to like rock the boat by starting this journey. But really looking at, how connected do you feel? How often do you really feel joy? How often are you willing to take risks for yourself in a healthy way? How often do you go out and do the things that you really want to do? Do you have a sense of what you want to do? Because so often one of the things that we do as a way of coping is not really allow ourselves to consider what we would really like for our lives. We just kind of accept that, okay, this is the way it is, and yeah, I'm happy. It's okay. It's a good life. And feel like you can be content with that. But when you really check in with yourself and ask, am I happy? Do I really enjoy my relationships? How many relationships am I engaged in that feel horrible to me, that drain me, that I try with everything in my power to avoid? Because that's not healthy. But we can fool ourselves into thinking that that's the way it should be, that because it looks okay or good from the outside, that is something to strive for and to be content with. So while this healing journey can bring up stuff that you've not allowed yourself to experience, to feel, to remember, as long as you are continuing to move through it step by step, moment by moment, you will not get stuck there. And I feel really confident in being able to say that because of the work that I've done over the years. Where people aren't able to move forward, it's generally speaking because they give up too soon. Their current environment is not conducive to healing, because I've talked about this before too. Like if you are working on healing, but everybody around you is not supportive, and maybe you're even in really unhealthy relationships, you're really stressed out about your current life circumstances, that makes it a whole lot harder to heal. A whole lot harder, because you're just surviving. Like you've got to focus on surviving. So it does make it more challenging, without a doubt. But even in those situations, as long as you have support, the right type of support, and you continue to show up for yourself in your healing journey, and that can look different ways on different days, you are moving forward every day. And even on those days when you're not taking a step forward, where you feel like you've taken steps back, it doesn't mean that you have. You're just taking a little bit of a break before you move forward again. And that is a natural part of the process for everybody. The most important thing is that you don't give up, because if you give up at that point, it is very likely that you will feel worse, because you've let go of some of that coping. You've allowed yourself to begin to accept, to feel, to process, and then suddenly you're stopping it. So you're kind of left in the middle of all of that. And there's a good chance that you're probably not dealing with that with anybody. You don't have support. You're probably not talking about it because maybe you even feel ashamed that you're feeling worse, feel embarrassed, don't want to tell anybody. So it leaves you in that place of being quite possibly very depressed, very anxious. And I think it is important to talk about how that can happen when you're in therapy, to talk about how things have opened up for you in terms of feelings, in terms of struggles, because that is completely natural. With most people I work with, they often come in really energized, like, okay, let's do this. I'm ready. Tell me what to do. I'm going to do it. I'm going to put all my focus here. And unfortunately, healing doesn't work that way. But they'll start getting into it and kind of be freaked out a little bit, even by their own energy. And I think that is hard. I know that it's hard because it feels scary. But if you are working with a therapist, you can talk about that, because it is natural for that to happen. It says nothing about your ability to heal. It says nothing about you being strong or weak. Not at all. Well, maybe on one hand, it could say something about you being strong because you're doing it, right? So the most important thing, don't give up. Please, 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 don't give up. Work through it. Continue to talk about it. Identify what those struggles are, why it's happening, because there is a very valid reason that it's happening. It's not you. And the more that you can talk about it, the more that you can process it, the more benefit there is, because there's actually benefit in being able to process through and move through those periods that feel much more significant in terms of struggle. I'd love to hear from you. Can you relate to this? It is a challenge without a doubt. Share in the comments below. If you found this video helpful, make sure to give it a thumbs up. And again, if you haven't yet subscribed, make sure to do so and click the bell for notifications. I'll look forward to seeing you next time.